Hello and welcome to episode 14 of Pain in the Podcast. This week we're looking at pain in the school curriculum, and to help us we're joined by the marvellous Oliver Stewart, a teacher working in the northwest of England.
Hello and welcome to Pain in the Podcast, your place to find out everything you ever want to know about pain. I'm Don Wijesauria, and today I'm joined by Dr. Joshua Craw, Dr. Joseph Parsons, and a award-winning guest, Ollie Stewart. And today we're going to be talking about chronic pain in the national curriculum. Ollie, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Well, I'm a teacher in the northwest of England. I teach science. I'm second in department there. And I've been teaching now for 6 years. It's really nice for me to be on here today because I've got my best mates from uni, not you, Don, sorry, but got Dr. Parsons, who we went to Newcastle together, and they went on to become very successful people in their field, and now I'm a teacher. So, yeah.
And Ollie is a very successful man in his field. As Don said, he's an award-winning teacher. He won a Golden Apple Award, which is like a regional award in the Northwest for teaching excellence. So he's a really good person to have on today to talk about the school curriculum. And as you'll find out, the real dearth of pain in that curriculum. Ollie, do you want to kick off with a fact about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my fact is that some wine gives me headaches over other types of wine. So I find that I can safely drink a Malbec or a Merlot and I'll be fine the next day or in the evening. But as soon as I drink like a Pinot Noir, I just feel like my head's been kicked in by an angry mule. So I tend to stay away from that stuff. I'm not a big fan of white wine either, but anything helps with the teaching. Doesn't have to be wine, rum, whiskey, vodka, could be anything.
So I suppose the stereotypes of a teacher sat there with a glass of wine grading papers is completely accurate then?
It really is. It really is. I've actually had to apologise to my students before. There's been like weird red stains that have appeared on my like assessments before, and if I say, "Don't worry, it's not blood." It's just Tesco's finest Malbec or something.
And tears.
Lots of tears. Yeah.
My brother, he's a lecturer in France, and he says that the way that he marks his students' papers, I shouldn't really out him like this, is that he writes on pieces of paper 100 and puts it on the top step, and then writes like down in increments of 10, like 90, 80, 70, 60, and then he takes his students' papers at the top of the stairs and throws them in the air, and wherever they land is what grade they get. He's like, there's...
He stole that from me.
That explains why he always got such low marks.
That's the reason why.
That's the reason why. Look at the draw. You look at the draw. It depends where you land on that stair. It really does.
Bloody stairs.
Well, it doesn't help me out because I live in a bungalow, so.
Oh, he has to throw them outside. He throws them off the roof.
Yeah. I think it depends on my mood, really. If I see a red car, I'll be like, they can have a 4.
Out of 100.
Oh, wait, it's not ABC now, it's numbers.
Oh, no, it changed a while ago, yeah. It's now...
Get with the times, Josh.
Honestly, man.
I'm an old man. We all know this on the podcast. I'm ancient.
A-stars didn't exist in Josh's day.
Actually, my year was the first year in A-level where A-stars were introduced. So it was like a trial year. Yeah.
Back in 1846.
During the war.
Either way, Don, fact about you.
A fact about me is I am right-eye dominant, but because I play badminton, I've realised that it actually doesn't make any sense because the movement kind of dictates that you face the shuttle with your left eye. And so for someone who has messed up eyes like me and see double vision, it's a really big problem. So I guess my fact is that I'm just shit at badminton.
Dom, you say you got double vision. How long have you had double vision? So I'm going full doctor mode here, but how long have you had double vision for?
I think since I was about 3.
Have you had that checked out at all?
Oh yeah, many times.
Okay. I just want to check that just for the audience at home. If you have double vision, I recommend seeing a medical professional.
Yeah, Josh is just concerned because I've given him lifts to places in the car, and he didn't realise how bad my eyesight was.
I think Don can agree with this. I was gripping the door handle very tightly for the entire journey.
Yeah.
At least you get to see two doctors at once with double vision.
Unfortunately, in Josh's scenario, yeah.
That's true. Also, Josh, just to comment on your immediate doctor mode, as Arnold Schwarzenegger would say, it's not a tumour.
Not a tumour.
Thank you. I was hoping you'd do the impression. Mine was terrible. Shall I do my fact?
Alright, Joe, so what's your fact?
My fact is that, and I'm showing these to the screen for the boys, my head is too big for wireless headphones, so they can see that I've had to tape them together. So this happened actually quite a while ago, but I thought I'd share it. I got into a battle with Sony because I bought these headphones, and like a week after I bought them, I was putting them on, and they were on their max size, and the plastic cracked because my head is too big. So I got into a sort of a battle back and forth via email with Sony, and it ended on me shouting down the phone at one of their representatives who said, well, it's your fault that you damaged them. And I was like, I just put them on my head. That's all I did. And he was like, so I said, I sent an email afterwards saying that I'll never be buying any products from Sony again, because they're not inclusive of people with large heads.
Yeah, I feel like you discriminated against
that is fair.
Yeah.
Josh?
Yeah, so my fact this week is that I am currently building a gaming PC.
What games are you thinking of playing, Josh?
Yeah, so I've spent a good amount on it. I've researched all the different components, the graphics card, the CPU, and I'm going to be playing games that are 15 years old.
Great.
Well, what I've learned about myself recently is that I've finally got over my probably irrational fear of cats. When I was a child, I was scratched by one, and Joe and Josh, you probably noticed this scar I've got on my upper lip for when I was 2 years old. That I decided to hit my parents' cat when I had a nightmare, and I was scared of cats ever since. And I approached one the other day and stroked it. Not a problem. Didn't scratch me. Happy. So there we go.
Are you taking after Don with using only visual mediums for your facts on podcast?
Yes.
Also, I didn't realise it was a cat scratch. I've obviously seen that scar 1,000 times. Didn't realise it was a cat scratch.
Cat scratch.
Question: when you say you hit your parents' cat, did you wake up in the night and kind of like you were in a nightmare and you punched it and kind of that it woke you up by scratching you, or did you have a nightmare, it woke you up, you went and found the cat and hit it?
It was sort of neither of those. So I had a nightmare. I woke up. I went to my parents' bed. I wanted to go into their bed because I was scared. I was like 2 years old, and the cat was on the bed. And I was like, I want this space. And because I probably didn't master the art of fine motor movement since then. So I probably tried to budge the cat along, but probably knowing me, I probably ended up slapping it. And the cat didn't like that, and it ended up just giving me one across the face. So there we go.
I'm just baffled that you remember that from when you were 2 years old.
Yeah, well, it's been, I think my parents kept telling me over and over again. Interesting fact as well, my dad used to name cats after cigarette brands. So that was Marlboro who did that.
And I remember Benson and Hedges. They were my favourite twins.
Benson and Hedges were all right. Camel was a real bitch, though. Fucking hell. Yeah.
It was Lucky Strike was unfortunately killed when it ran into an electricity pylon.
Well, it sounds like Lucky Strike was the one who did it.
Yeah,
That's true.
Marlboro. Yeah.
Do you remember what the nightmare was about? Was that cat related?
It wasn't cat related. No, I don't remember what the nightmare was about. Ironically, it gave me more nightmares of cats. But after that incident. But no, I don't remember what the nightmare was about. But yeah.
So that's two irrational fears of very common animals on this podcast.
But you're overcoming yours. It's been so nice. It's come up 3 times on the podcast already, and every time you're getting closer and closer to overcoming your phobia. Maybe like the podcast will end and you can release doves from your hands. That can be like how the podcast finally comes to a close.
No,
No,
I don't think that'll ever happen.
Well, maybe we could release doves. I could try and release cats. I don't think the two should mix. But
I think that would be hilarious.
yeah, that would be good. To be fair, it would really
If
go.
I
Okay.
release cats and you release the doves.
I like that.
But no, I don't think I'll ever get to the point of actually touching a dove within the next 5 years, because I was sat at a cafe outside and just this pigeon just came up to me and I saw its little feet and that creeped me out even more.
They are a bit mangled, aren't they?
Why are they? It's like multicolored. What's wrong with that? Anyway.
Wait till you see a rainbow.
So I guess I'm next. What have I learned about myself? I've learned that I am the world's best skier.
Okay.
I'm just gonna leave it at that.
Okay. Can we put some videos of you skiing?
That's a good question. I don't think there are any, so it's just you just have to take my word for it. No, so I've recently been on a skiing trip, and it was my second time skiing. The last time I went skiing was about 10 years ago, and I was expecting to be really rusty, but no, it kind of came back to me fairly after about the second time going down the slope, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm still bad. I'm still very, very bad, but I was impressed with how fast it came back. So yeah.
I was going to say I'm smirking away here because Don, I can't remember whether we spoke while he was still there or when he came back, but he was telling me about how he fell off one of the lifts that carry you up. Not like a chair lift, but like a drag lift.
Button lift.
Like a button lift, exactly. And he said that he was trying to kind of slowly get his way back down the button lift and had to go off-piste to get back onto the slopes. Finally built up the confidence to do it and then ended up with one of his skis going down the mountain and kind of 20, 30 feet away.
I had to ask 2 very hunky Italian men to help me, and they just laughed in my face. I just kicked my skis and it was fine. They just fixed it with a good old kick.
It was all a ploy to get the hunky Italian men over.
Yeah, so if you're listening, hunky Italian men with your cigarette and espresso, thank you.
What they were on duty and they were smoking and having a coffee.
Oh, of course, yeah, it's an Italian way.
Who needs ski poles?
Oh, I thought they were doing it while they were skiing. They were just having a let's go.
Can we add Italians to the list of countries and nationalities that we've insulted on this podcast?
Absolutely. We've already insulted them, Josh. There was olive oil in episode 2. Either way, moving on. I learned that when I try to use a foam roller on the side of my hip, it looks like some weird attempt to mount it. I haven't mastered it yet. Supposedly it's meant to be good for like stretching out the muscles on the side of your hip, but it just kind of looks like I'm flailing around on top of it. A bit like a scene from The In-Betweeners. It's not going well.
That's how most people look when they're doing that on a foam roller.
Yeah, but I'm watching all these YouTube people who are all like toned and and they're doing this foam roll and make it look so easy, and it's really not, and it hurts. It hurts a lot.
You look like a salmon on land.
Yes, that's exactly how I look. Josh?
Yeah, so what I learned this week, let me think. So what I've learned this week is that I used to be really good at organising things, but now I'm just completely and utterly hopeless. So the actual thing I've learned is that becoming a doctor has made me worse at organising my own life.
Because you're spending all your organisational skills.
Yeah.
My organisational skills are great at work. Now it just seems like work if I try to organise anything.
Yeah, I get that.
Catch-22, it's ruined it for me. It's like when I used to work in the kitchens, now it's completely ruined cooking for me because it just feels like more work.
Yeah, that's true. I've had so many ready meals this week. It's a joke.
To be fair, Don, you did lose on your Marks Get Set Feed Me, so we do have to assume that Josh is the better of the two cooks. Any of you who have us on Patreon, you will be able to see our knockoff Ready Steady Cook competition that we had, where Josh managed to win with his serving of gruel.
It looked so bad. Honestly, it's the worst looking thing ever, but it tasted okay.
It was okay. It was good. It was nice and spicy. Either way, shall we move on to the episode?
Yes.
I think we do. Let's do it.
Fantabulous. So we're talking about pain in the school curriculum, and I want to kick off just talking about how prevalent chronic pain is in children, because I think I'd kind of assumed that it would be a really low rate and that it would kind of pick up a lot in the later teen years. But as you can see in our show notes, we've got various references talking about prevalence of chronic pain, and it seems that across different populations, somewhere between 16 and 37% of children have chronic pain. Now, I was trying to think back to my primary school years about like anyone I knew with pain, and there was one girl in our school who had juvenile arthritis, and so I know that she will have been living with pain. But I was just wondering, do you guys have any recollection of like in your sort of young and teenage years of knowing people with pain? Or were you similarly kind of unaware of it like me?
I think I was completely oblivious to all the other children in my class, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I it wasn't something really seen or spoken about. So you might have known someone who had maybe a disability or something like that, and you thought, oh, that's them, but you wouldn't associate so much with the chronic pain to go with it. But no, it wasn't really something I was exposed to.
No, and I suppose we might have been exposed to it, but like, did we really understand it at the time as well? And I think that's a big thing, isn't it?
Probably not. No.
Like,
also
as a child, did we recognise the signs?
No, yeah. And it was also a lot less discussed because we are all ancient, especially Josh. But yeah, we just didn't really bring it up. Even if we did have a condition or knew someone with some kind of condition.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, children don't really comprehend the idea, like when they think about pain, they're thinking about like falling over and scraping your knees. Like the concept when you're a child, for the majority of children, of being in pain 24/7, I thought was really rare. But it seems from these articles that actually chronic pain is way more prevalent in children than I'd realised. So maybe it's just these children struggle to communicate it, and maybe that's the sort of thing we should talk about in this episode, about whether there's any ways that children could be empowered to discuss their own health.
Yeah, so as a doctor, in emergency medicine in particular, I do see children a fair amount, and I found it incredibly difficult when children present with pain. It's okay with the older children, but it's so difficult with children, I'd say, even as old as 10. Just for them to be able to describe accurately what's happening. I mean, it's difficult for the best of us. It's difficult for adults who have a full vocabulary and are usually very eloquent. But for children, you see very different signs. I mean, even in the case of some toddlers, for example, if a child has a headache, they can't tell you they've got a headache. They can't verbalize that. And like we see some children, even with headaches, like banging their head against a wall or against the floor or what have you, as a sort of like showing that they've got pain in their head.
Mm.
It's really tragic, to be honest. But it, like you say, it's just how do you, obviously, like them banging their heads against the wall is quite an obvious sign of that they're having some distress. But like, it's really hard, I think, to read, especially when like kids express their emotions so differently, and you get some kids who are quite subdued and maybe wouldn't give you those obvious outward signs. And it's like, I think it's quite difficult without empowering these kids to actually see what's going on.
I think that's interesting how that, as soon as they're probably able to tell you where the pain is, the embarrassment of of being seen as describing pain kicks in, and that's adolescence and puberty, right? So that's when, if you know, in a classroom, and then you say, oh, you don't really want to put your hand up, draw attention to yourself and say, oh, my head hurts. Or, you know, even worse than that, I suppose you could argue, if you go to a doctor's office and you have to describe pain, which is in a more intimate area, that's even, you know, a lot more embarrassing as well. And it's, I think it's difficult, as it just adds that extra element to teenagers who find it really difficult to sort of like convey how they're feeling in terms of areas of the body. So, yeah.
But it's also, because so I remember as a kid, I mean, going I've been wearing glasses since I was 3, so I remember going to the optometrist and doing all these tests with the different lenses. And even when I was able to verbalize, I still found it impossible to describe the differences between the two lenses and all that. So I can only imagine how difficult it is to describe something so kind of intrinsic. Intrinsic? That's not the right word.
And kind of like nebulous as well. It's like it's kind of hard to pin down what a pain experience is like. There's so much there's so many different elements to it that it's really hard to kind of pin that down, isn't it? I think, Ollie, honestly, what you said was really, really pertinent. I'd never thought about it like that, but you're completely right. When you hit that kind of teenage years where you start to be able to express yourself, you want to hide it. And obviously, like we've mentioned in previous podcasts about like how women's pain is effectively ignored, and there are some bits that I want to mention later on about pain in female children, but I think there's a lot of pressure, and I don't know if you guys can shed any light on this. There's a paper by Hatchette et al. From 2008 that basically says that like male teenagers were really unwilling to talk about their pain because they were worried about being deemed to feel, and I quote, soft. And so it's like, I don't know if you guys ever felt that with your pain experiences. I know, Ollie, you're lucky enough not to live with daily pain, but like obviously you will have experienced painful times. Yeah,
I don't deal with it yet. So you never know. There could be a scenario in the near future.
But unless you're Benjamin Button, you're not going to have to deal with it in school as a child.
Oh well, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Seeing that in my own sort of practice with what you were saying, Joey, I definitely see that it's definitely something that the male students definitely struggle to sort of like communicate with. Is that what we have in our school is that if they're experiencing any pain, the only thing we can really do is either send them down to the first aid office or give them paracetamol in the student office. And it's 9 times out of 10, it is normally the females who are normally sort of asking for pain, for obvious reasons, related to that. But with the ones who ask for headache, and general like aching and things like that, it's normally the females who tend to ask for that, and the males, let's just get on with it and crack on.
I think there's some attitudes to that as well. So I'm a little bit older than Joe and Ollie. So I was in secondary school in the early to mid 2000s. And like, it's a completely different attitude that both the children and the teachers had in that time.
Yeah.
It was a lot more, stop complaining, that sort of thing. Whereas I think Ollie might be able to agree nowadays, like teachers, you can't be as abrupt, can you? Maybe that's an assumption I'm making, but
no, I think a lot of the time, there's this ideology that I'll just stick a wet paper towel on it. I mean, I'd agree with you, Josh, there. That's sort of what I was brought up on as well. But now it is about, there is better communication with parents with school as to like what to watch out for in terms of if a student is in pain. And I think it is important that we do have that as teachers, as practitioners, to know, because you are loco apprentice, you are essentially the parent of the child when they are in school. And I think it is important that we do get those pupils to communicate with us when they are in pain.
I suppose the follow-up question to that then, Ollie, is are there any facilities sort of within general education, so within a secondary school setting, for example, where children can go and, like, in a safe space, maybe talk about pain or anything like that?
I think that depends on a few things. Depends on the budget of the school. Private versus state would make a big difference there. I mean, I've only worked in state schools. And there normally is a space for pupils to go if they are in pain. If it is severe, we just sort of say, like, go to the first aid office, see what they can do there. But then again, I think the training that a lot of the first aiders receive is very limited to how to deal with chronic pain. I think a lot of the time it's sort of bring it home or give a paracetamol or something to that effect, But yeah.
I think one of the hard parts about like kids, when you talk about those kids who've got that really quite severe pain, is obviously like kind of as a teacher, when you've got an ill child, your natural inclination is to send them home. But there was a really interesting study in Ireland that was looking at like teachers' attitudes towards children with chronic pain, and basically the agreement was when they sat and thought about it, sending kids home is a terrible solution, because it's like all you're doing is excluding them from education. So it's like, what can you do? And like you say, these spaces where kids can go and kind of have some time to themselves, it is valuable. But I feel like there's more support mechanisms needed for these children to help them stay in school. Because otherwise you just end up kind of putting them behind an education. And then already we've spoken about in episodes 6 and 7, about work and pain. They're already at a disadvantage with their pain condition, and so further taking away that education from them, it sets them back even more.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with that, and it relates to a previous point where Josh was saying how children struggle to communicate their needs. We are seeing a loss of literacy in school children, and I think we have different tiers of language which students are exposed to. So give you a brief outline. You've got tier 1 language, which is very much basic words, I, the, and sort of thing. Then you've got tier 2 language, which is used in every day. So it's things like popular and weather and things like that. Things that can be used cross-curricular. But then you've got the tier 3 language, which is subject specific. So I'm a science teacher, so I'll use words like cytoplasm and mitochondria, things like that. And I think I was going to make this point earlier, but when Josh said they struggle to communicate those needs, with pain, you can have is it a shooting pain? Is it a sharp pain? Like, how would you describe that? And I think that's also going to have a big impact on how people are going to definitely communicate, or children are going to communicate their needs to people as well.
To be honest, I think I still struggle with that. I have no idea what dull pain is. What's dull pain?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What's blunt pain? Or exactly, yeah. Is blunt pain a thing?
I wouldn't say blunt, but dull definitely is. So
yeah.
The different, if somebody let's say a 40-year-old man comes to me, tells me they've got sharp stabbing chest pain, and and the same man comes and tells me they've got a tearing chest pain.
Yeah.
I'm a lot more worried as a doctor with the patient that says they've got tearing chest pain. That's my alarm bells are ringing just with that use of that single word. And as we're saying, children, they don't have that tier 3. They may not have that tier 2 language. So if they're not able to use those key words that doctors, healthcare professionals, parents, teachers are sort of zoned in on, picking up, then I think could be quite a lot missed. I mean, very luckily, you very, very incredibly rarely would you see a child have a heart attack, for example, or a stroke or anything along those lines. But I think it still really emphasizes how poorly we understand children in pain.
Yeah. I think as well the problem that we have is not only do kids struggle with the language of verbalizing what they're feeling with their pain, but their understanding of pain that we ingrain into them from a young age is really not keeping up to date with modern pain science.
So I was always told, I was kind of raised to believe that if you tripped over, it was the ground's fault, and you're supposed to blame the ground. So, yeah, I was that idiot that would just go around yelling at trees or whatever. So if I ever had chronic pain as a child, what am I supposed to do? Just yell at myself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is as well, I think there's this study in South Africa that was looking at how kids understand pain, and they use some educational interventions first and then looked to see how much it had improved kids' understanding of pain. So they talked about modern pain science, and then they looked to see what the outcome was with the kids. And the kids could understand that the brain was key to processing pain, and they could understand that emotions were linked to pain. But the one thing that, despite the education, they really struggled to change was this idea that tissue damage and pain are correlated. The kids could not get out of their head that sometimes you can have pain without any tissue damage. And so I think that understanding of it, mixed with the inability to express the pain they're feeling, it must just be a nightmare for kids, because you must feel that something is really wrong.
Can I just add on to that as well? Sorry. So I read a report by the Cambridge Assessment, and this is it's 9 years old. I couldn't find anything more recent, but 2016 they did a sort of a bit of a survey amongst Key Stage 4 students, and they're finding that only 0.2% of Key Stage 4 pupils are choosing health and social care as an option at GCSE. Now, it's important we talk about that, I think, because, in terms of 3 subjects that talk about chronic pain at GCSE, you're talking biology, PSHE, So personal, social health education, and health and social care. Biology just talks about the ins and outs, that you've got a stimulus, receptor, sensory neuron, central nervous system, motor neuron, bish, bash, bosh, learn that. PSHE is more about the sources of pain and a little bit on how to deal with it, but not much. Health and social care is probably the one subject that really goes into it in a bit more detail. It tells students how to care for people who are in pain. And interestingly, this Cambridge report said that only 0.2% of pupils choose health and social care as an option at GCSE level. Of that 0.2%, it is predominantly females who choose it. So you've got a double whammy there. You've got the vast majority of pupils past the age of 14, because that's the age you tend to choose your GCSEs, that past that age, they don't know how to deal with pain. They don't know how to deal with themselves. They don't know how to deal with people around them. Also, massive disparity between males and females there. It's sort of reinforcing that idea that Hatchette said, and what Joe mentioned before, that it's the males who will be seen as, worried they'll be seen as soft if they're experiencing feelings of pain. And it's, again, reinforcing that stigma that it's the females who should be seen as tending to people who are in pain, whereas it needs to be the males need to be sort of saying, no, I'm in pain, and that's something we need to fix, I think.
Yeah. I don't know if obviously that's in the UK, and I don't know if that kind of same sentiment applies across countries. But in Spain, they interviewed 561 school children to kind of get a decent representative sample. And the girls in the sample were far less likely to feel that medical professionals could cure their pain, which obviously is a little bit depressing, but actually is probably like a much more realistic view of chronic pain. But then the problem was they also had higher rates of catastrophizing, which is kind of like, if they've got pain, they assume it's really bad, they assume it's tissue damage related. So there's kind of that balance where in some aspects it seems that these female pupils had a better understanding of pain, and in other ways they had a worse understanding. But like you say, 0.2% is nothing, really. And that means that, 99.8% of kids are barely scratching the surface.
Yep. Scary.
So, Ollie and Josh, I think you two are probably the best people to answer this. Sorry, Joe, you're just stupid. But have you guys just noticed, when it comes to parents' attitudes towards their children's chronic pain, have you encountered any experience with that? And what do they do? Do they have any intervention that the child can bring them to the schools, just pain relief or anything like that? What are their attitudes on pain relief as a parent for their child?
Josh, do you want to go first?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I think that's an absolutely excellent question, Don, and it's very pertinent. Some parents, they're just sort of like, they're just playing up. They're always complaining about things. Some parents are very concerned. I mean, no parent wants a child to be in pain. 100%. I 100% agree with that. But it's just very difficult to manage expectations, particularly with chronic pain where we're expecting to have some ongoing pain. There's no magic pill that just cures everything. Same as everything in life. And parents really want that because to them, their child's perfect, as all children are, and they don't want them to suffer whatsoever. But we can't fix pain. I mean, we've talked about on previous episodes of this podcast that there is no magic fix-all. There's no silver bullet. There are ways to manage things, but in the long run, it's about building resilience and having coping mechanisms more than anything, particularly when it comes to long-term chronic pain where there isn't a cure for it.
Yeah, I was going to sort of agree with Josh there. I think every parent wants what's best for their kid. And as a teacher myself, I do sort of see, if we look at the bigger picture here, I'm talking about a small handful of pupils who are teaching that deal with chronic pain. And in terms of the grand scale of things, it is one extreme or the other. And it would be, they need to shake it off. They need to, get up and go. On the other hand, it is very much like they're seriously ill. They can't do PE. They have to leave lessons 5 minutes early. They have to do this, that, and the other. And I think that's something that, Josh was sort of saying, I think that's where we might need to start thinking about, well, let's deal with some resilience and let's deal with how can we help them beyond the classroom there?
I imagine that's really difficult for you, Ollie, as well. I don't know how much experience you have with children with chronic pain, but when the parents come in, okay, here's a plan, this is what we do when X happens, and then you're not medically trained. Like, how comfortable are you with sort of enacting those plans that the parents sort of give you?
Well, again, just adding to the many roles that a teacher's expected to do. Again, you don't have the meeting with the parent. You know, if a parent is concerned that a child has an issue with themselves, then it won't be a case of the parent will individually speak to the teachers. The parent will go to someone particular at school. Normally, it will be first aider, or it'll be a member of SLT, so senior leadership team, and then that will get communicated to staff. Now, depending on the timings you've got in your meetings, it could be an in-depth brief of how to deal with the particular pupil, or it could just be a gloss over. It could just be, first in the former you've got in-depth detail of age they were diagnosed, how they're dealing with it now, where they go, how what you should do if this happens, what you should do if this happens. On the other hand, they go 5 minutes early, or they arrive 5 minutes late to your lessons. That's it. And as a member of staff, sometimes you are very much kept out in the loop because, again, your job is there to teach. Is like you said, Josh, it's not there to deal with health issues. But we go into the job thinking we want what's best for the kid, we want what's best for the pupil. And I think we need to recognise that to help them. Maybe we should receive the training to help them as best we can.
Because I was going to ask this, Ollie, that same study I spoke about earlier on in Ireland, the teachers in that study said that they really struggled when there wasn't a protocol to follow. So they said that they were suspicious of kids who said they had pain but didn't have a diagnosis because it was they have that same disbelief that a lot of people have. But they said they found it much easier, one, to believe the child, and two, to help them manage when they had a diagnosis, because it gave a kind of protocol they could go by. So do you think that we should be trying to help children with pain in the school system, that we should be trying to give teachers kind of, not necessarily a strict protocol based on the condition, but like giving them a child-specific protocol to say, this is how you can support this child?
No, I'd agree. I think we do need to sort of put that in play. I think that teachers themselves do suffer with that judgment, and I think when you get a student in your class who comes and says, "Oh, I need to leave 5 minutes early," or I have to go outside for whatever reason, then automatically you do feel that, for me anyway, you do feel a little bit of annoyance, because you do want them to remain in the class and you do want to have a good sort of classroom environment, and you want the learning to go on. You want what's best for that particular child, and them leaving 5 minutes early does disrupt the lesson. Also, with more learning walks, so a learning walk is that SLT will come into your classrooms and be like, everything's looking good in here, everything's looking fine. They'll come into your classroom and make sure that everything's going on. And then sometimes you have to explain to yourself why a student is outside your room, and you don't want that to look bad on you. So you do have to be careful there as well. In terms of like strict protocol and what we should follow, I think that it is important for teachers to recognise what to do when there is an accident. So, for example, if a child, I know this is not chronic pain, but if we're dealing with a child with epilepsy, then teachers are aware of, or should be aware of, like what to do when pupils have a fit or a seizure, and then deal with it appropriately. Now, most of the time it is try and get them on, if you can, try and get them on the floor as best you can, keep the area clear and call a first aider. That's kind of the extent as to what you're expected to do. Maybe there should be something in place for pupils with chronic pain for teachers, but again, what you're doing is you're already adding to the long list of responsibilities that teachers are expected to do. It's tricky, in my opinion. I think it's really tricky. I mean, the way the funding's going with a lot of state schools is, for a better word, down the Swanee. And I think if you're trying to get a school nurse into a school now, for a state school, is incredibly difficult. And then if you want people to know how to deal with students with chronic pain, it's just adding to the roster of busyness, isn't it? So it's tricky.
So I guess that empowering the children is kind of the key thing here, is that if we can help them to manage their own pain and educate them on how to have more empathy and care for others, that's probably a better way of doing it rather than getting new staff. And so I think I'd like to move us on to thinking about how peers relate to each other in relation to chronic pain. I think it's really interesting. There's a study in the States where they were looking at, they basically made 2 vignettes, so like case studies basically, so made up case studies, and they were exactly the same cases, except in one the disease was described as having a fictional name, and in one the disease was described as having like pain but no disease to cause it, basically, so no obvious cause of the pain.
Yeah.
And one was male, one was female. So you got 4 conditions: real disease, male, female; pain with no clear disease, male, female. And students were really sympathetic to the people who had what they defined as a real disease, like a defined disease, and they were sympathetic to male characters, but they were neither sympathetic to female characters, nor were they sympathetic to people who had somatic symptoms or symptoms not clearly related to a disease. So it's interesting that these kids were 10 years old as well. So from the age of 10, we've already got this mindset of that we're disrespecting women's pain, and that we feel like any pain that doesn't have an obvious kind of like empirical cause isn't of value.
Also, to add to that, it's a disease that's not caused by yourself. It's caused by another organism. It's caused by bacteria, virus, fungus, pathogen, whatever. And I feel like people have that negative view that, oh, it's your body failing you. And it shouldn't. It's maybe that's a negative stigma associated to it there.
Yeah,
and they feel more
that's a really
sympathetic for people. Maybe they're more sympathetic to people who've caught something that they just caught and they were unfortunate.
Yeah, I think you can see that as well. Just going away from pain slightly, you can see that lung cancer versus, let's say, kidney cancer. People typically are more sympathetic towards kidney cancer than lung cancer because lung cancer is seen as a disease that's your own fault. You smoked for 40 years, so of course you got cancer. Whereas kidney cancer, sorry about that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a study about victimization. So, like, victimization, this idea of you have been made a victim in a situation, you have been discriminated against in some way. And they compared kids with chronic pain, teenagers with chronic pain, to teenagers without. And they found that they had a sort of a similar number of victimization events in total, but the chronic pain teenagers had far fewer peer interactions. So they're not getting out of the house as much, they're not as able to socialize, and yet they still experience the same amount of victimization. So per interaction, they're feeling a lot greater degree of victimization. And this correlated with worse mood, with greater limitation of activity, so like daily activities that you need to do to live, and higher pain as well. So this judgment that we have for these conditions where we feel like it's like Ollie said, a failure of the body, that's ingrained from a really young age.
I wonder why that is. I wonder why people would perceive the idea of your own body failing you, why we feel it is quite negative, but oh, God forbid if someone was to contract measles, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like people have more sympathy there.
Yeah. To be honest with you, I'm just as bad as the kids in that study, because like my ex-girlfriend, when I was 17 and 18, she had something called Arnold-Chiari malformation, which is like a where the back of the skull is pressing on the brainstem, basically. So it presents with a lot of pain, presents with sort of abnormal sensations and things like that. And even though I was living with chronic pain, I really struggled to wrap my head around how she could be in so much pain. And it's just mad that even though I was experiencing it and should have had more empathy than anyone else, I still couldn't wrap my head around kind of the process.
Coming from a doctor's point of view, this is literally, I've had this, been within this argument / like discussion within this very week, honestly. I was within the doctor's office, I'm not going to tell you what department or what hospital that is currently, and there was a debate saying that fibromyalgia wasn't real.
Oh,
Yeah.
Saying that it is literally just not making it up, but like it's all in the head. There's no real pathology behind it. And I was just sat there gobsmacked. If my jaw could have hit the floor, I mean, I did have to say something, and I did. But Jesus Christ, these are some doctors as well. I don't talk lightly. I don't talk bad about doctors lightly, but these are pervasive attitudes, and it's not just in children, it's systemic, even with healthcare professionals who should know better. So how can we expect children to sort of come with, appreciate these complex biopsychosocial models when health practitioners can't?
Yeah, so the current trajectory we've got is kids can't communicate that they've got chronic pain. A lot of them feel victimized by other kids when they do. Then when they get to adolescence, they feel brave enough to say they're in pain. Some doctors saying, we're probably talking bullshit.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I just want to highlight, that's not all doctors.
No.
Some doctors are absolutely fantastic. It's a very small minority, but I think it's that small minority that have the biggest impact.
It could happen. It could happen. It could happen in someone's life that they go through the first 20 years of their life not knowing what they've got, in complete pain, thinking it's normal.
Yeah, I guess then that's probably a good time to start thinking about like what educational interventions have been used for children to help them better understand pain, and what your ideas in particular, Ollie, are about how we can better educate these kids. And from your experience as a teacher, what styles of teaching do you think would be best? So should we start with kind of the existing literature, and then we can give Ollie a bit of time to think?
Yeah, let's do that. I think that's a good way. Dom, would you like to kick us off?
No, I would not.
Okay. So a lot of these interventions for kids in the literature are based around videos, and I think we all understand why that is. Like, this is not to sound like a boomer, but this is a TikTok generation. Rah, rah, rah. But obviously kids now are engaging in content in a different way. They might even be listening to this podcast, but they're not necessarily sitting down. They're not going to be reading leaflets. Presenting it as a standard kind of talk to the class presentation probably isn't the way to do it. And so there's been a lot of use of educational videos to talk about the difference between acute and chronic pain, how pain impacts on families, like factors that can influence the development of pain, the persistence of pain, how it can be treated. And then one thing that was really nice, there's a research team up in Teesside Uni, where I've been lucky enough to have a research associate position, where they came in, they gave some videos, they did a lecture, and then they did a Q&A session and what they call experiential learning activities, which is basically like where they put themselves, they role play. Imagine GCSE drama. But hopefully slightly better than that. But they're kind of getting kids to really be engaged in it. I'm interested to know, Ollie, like, what are your thoughts on what would be the best ways to get kids genuinely interested in learning about this?
I think you need to have a culture approach. So I think you need to get all the pupils of the school to understand the importance of it. It can't just be one or two teachers just saying, this is pain, this is how you deal with it. It needs to be widespread, and I think there needs to be a culture adopted by the school to do that. There needs to be efficient signposting to, places where they can go if they are struggling with their pain as well. I think it also needs to be a case of telling the teachers, well, maybe if a student is experiencing chronic pain, maybe it could be a case of don't panic and don't just rush them down to the first aid or to get some paracetamol, like I mentioned before. Maybe it could be a case of, right, what's your resilience? Maybe why don't you go to ILS or a support place where you can then go and do some mindfulness, or you can do some activity which will distract you from the pain. I think then there needs to be a zero tolerance for bullying if it's seen amongst peers. If you do see negative peer-on-peer interaction and it's them pretty much having a go at that pupil for being in pain or for victimizing them in any way, then sanction heavily. And make sure, and I think communicate with parents as well. Make sure parents know that we've got this zero tolerance policy towards this. Following that, depending on the size of the school, obviously with bigger schools, the chances of you having more pupils in chronic pain increases. So maybe you could set up support groups or places where pupils feel they can talk, so they can feel they can be confident that they can express their views, express their thoughts. They're just some ideas that I thought I could include.
Those are really interesting. In terms of the first one that you mentioned, the culture approach, I feel like you gave that answer so confidently that you've answered a £1 million question, which is, how do we get all the teachers in the school to think the same thing? Because I remember back in my school, like teachers wouldn't even agree on lunchtime policies and stuff. I don't know how things are these days.
No,
But,
it's still there's a lot of friction between teachers and the senior leadership team. There is a lot. It's the bureaucracy, and I think one thing I've learned as a teacher is having a good senior leadership team makes all the difference. Really does.
Yeah.
What are some things that you've noticed that your team, for example, your excellent SLT team, have done to help in that situation?
Pupil first.
People first.
Pupil first. Yeah. First question you should ask if there's ever a new initiative, new policy, new idea. How is it making the pupils' experience here better?
I like that.
You've got that's got to be the foundation. That's what we're in it for. We're in to help the pupils. We're not here for them to tolerate. Well, some pupils we have to be like, right, we can tolerate your experience here. We're not going to try not to make you hate it, but for the majority of them, you want to be like, no, I want you to enjoy your time here, and it needs to be pupil centric, I feel. And for that to happen, teachers need to be better at, and especially I'm going to say it, I think senior leaders need to be better at communicating that to teachers. It's that communication, I think, where it struggles.
Can I flip this on its head a little bit? There's a public health campaign in Australia called PPEP, which is Pelvic Pain and Endometriosis Program. They go in and they give year 10 students, so 15, 16, that kind of mid-teenager stage, and they go and give them a talk about pelvic health. And it's not just to the female students, but to all the students in that year. And they talk about what level of pain is normal, what you can do to manage the pain, and how you can be a better ally to people with pelvic pain and endometriosis. Now, obviously, we've spoken a little bit earlier on in the episode about how like pain in female children is often neglected, and also in minority ethnicities, in individuals in the LGBT community, like it really is far worse for them than it is for male children. There's an article on the BBC actually looking at period pain in school children in the UK, and there was one school that banned school absence for kids for period pain unless they had a medical diagnosis. But bear in mind that endometriosis average diagnosis time is 8 years, and let's say that girls start to menstruate at the earliest at 9, if they're really, really early. Like, they might just about scrape into an endometriosis diagnosis. If it kicked off from day 1, they might get in there by 17. But most girls are starting to have their periods later on in life, and so by the time they're getting that endometriosis diagnosis, they are
at university.
Yeah, beyond school age. So do you think that like this PPEP initiative, being an external public health thing that comes into schools, do you think maybe it's better that we take the responsibility off of teachers and make this something that is standardised, nationalised, and that is external to the teaching team? Or do you think that teachers are best suited because of their better connection with the kids?
I'm all for reducing teacher workload wherever I can. Surveys, studies have been done, and teaching's up there with like the top 5 most stressful careers, with surgeons, air traffic controllers, that kind of thing. Teaching is normally in the top 5. So I'd say I'd support anyone who said, can we take anything off teachers? I think that's a great idea. The relationship dynamics, though, would affect maybe a pupil's confidence in telling someone how they would feel. And I think a way to get around that, potentially, maybe have the teacher in the room if the student wanted to. I'm saying that, they don't have to be in there, but maybe have the teacher in there with the student while they're speaking to this external provider. And, they're that teacher's lifeline. And that could be a way around it. I just think, like I said before, the way funding's going with a lot of state schools is, could a lot of places get these people? And I think it's a great idea in theory. Practically, it's rare we get school nurses in, and a lot of the time they're talking mainly about the dangers of smoking, the dangers of drinking, the dangers of unprotected sex, that kind of thing. And again, I think chronic pain needs to be recognised as a pretty serious issue if we want to carry it forward seriously. And if it wants to be talked about, then it needs to, fortunately, it needs to have some heavier statistics behind it. Up there with, I'm not saying it's not important at all, but otherwise I wouldn't be on the podcast. But, I think the ones that are mainly talked about amongst teenagers tend to be the social aspects, as well as the smoking, it's the drinking, it's the unprotected sex, it's those three. But there needs to be heavier statistics behind it, like I said. And the only way I think that can really happen is, like I mentioned before, get pupils talking about it, get pupils recognizing it, get pupils feeling safe about telling people about it as well. And hopefully the statistics might then carry forward, and then school nurses might, or an external provider could be inclined to say, well, no, this is an issue to talk about. And then that's taken off the teacher's workload. External provider gets to help the pupil. Win-win.
I can't argue with anything you've said there, Ollie. Like, I mean, even if it was something simple, like we've mentioned, is it PSHE? What was it? Is that right? Like, even if you had like one session every month or every other month, I think that takes it off the teacher, but then it takes off other teachers rather. But then it's just that little impetus where to get students thinking about pain, maybe.
Yeah. And those initiatives, those drives, they need to be taken by senior leaders, and they have a lot of. Don't get me wrong. I feel like I've pretty much slagged them off the whole podcast, but don't get me wrong, they're busy people as well. They mainly have to worry about governors and Ofsted and a lot of tick boxing, things like that. So it's tricky, man. It's really tricky. Like I think they need to put it as part of their agenda, and like I said, I think it needs to be consistent. You need to, I've worked in schools where they said, right, this year the new initiatives are we're going to start using a new language, or they're going to, have a new policy in place for things if a student does something right or so a student does something wrong. And if the SLT aren't saying it often, and they're not reinforcing it in the briefings, emails, etc., falls flat on its face within 2 weeks. And you need to be consistent there. You need to have that consistent approach, and you need to be constantly remind your staff, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. It's the intent. It's the intention. It's the impact. It needs to be done.
So we effectively kind of concluding in terms of where this needs to go is not only does there need to be kind of more inclusion in the national curriculum, it needs to be teachers who are starting this process of getting kids speaking about it, but it needs to be SLT helping to encourage these teachers, helping to show them what messages they should be spreading, and then with that, and hopefully more funding, which obviously is a pipe dream, but hypothetically, that could be used to bring in external providers to provide that greater depth of teaching. And then that combination of that greater depth of teaching with the kids having good relationships with their own teachers, that means that they get this understanding and they've got someone that they trust to talk to about it.
Yeah, and the great thing is being a teacher as well, sorry to interrupt you there, Joe, but, you are a link with, you are a conduit between the pupil and getting a referral for something. So that's a real privilege of my job. I can help them in more than ways than one. I can say, well, maybe they need a SEND referral, a special educational needs referral. In this case, it could be, that's the main thing we're sort of meant to sort of observe amongst pupils more than anything. I've never been told really keep an eye out if any of these pupils are displaying pain, I think that's more a case of we'd expect the doctors to do that. But maybe it should be a case of if a pupil is constantly, maybe if a pupil is consistently displaying headaches, or they're constantly saying, I need a chair for a back. Because I'm a science teacher, we all have stools. And I've had a few pupils in the past say, I can't sit on a stool, so I need something with back support. Maybe that could be, we could flag that if a student constantly asks for that.
Sorry, Ollie, that raises a good point. So I used to volunteer as a TA, as a teaching assistant a while ago, and I noticed that kids, so it was a year 5 class, and so they kind of developed their vocabulary a lot more than younger kids. But I noticed that some kids would use certain phrases and just their language was very particular when it came to genuine expressions of, I don't know, just boredom or whatever emotion they were feeling, instead of just saying things to get out of the task that they were meant to be doing. So what have you kind of noticed any particular language that kids use that to convey their genuine frustration, or in this case pain?
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think got into a point there is getting out of things. You know, we're always going to have people abuse the system. You know, it's almost a certainty, isn't it? Really, but for pupils who are constantly saying, "Oh, I've got a headache," and they've said it not like little and often, but like often. You know what I mean? Like they're saying it a few times a week or over several weeks. Then I think that's when you'd be inclined to sort of be like, right, what's going on here? It is. Don't get me wrong. It's a lot of the characters that say it are normally they do say it quite a lot just to try and get out of lesson. But I mean, you know, if you want to catch a big net, you know, if you want to cast a big net, sorry, then if it's worth catching that one, it's worth it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the thing is, you've got to remember that these kids, there might be some who are abusing the system, but if we go into it with the mindset that any kid that complains frequently about pain is abusing the system, then we're going to fall flat on our faces very quickly. Now, I'm conscious of time. We've had a nice long discussion today, and I want to get this feature in before we finish up. Obviously, we have to think outside the box a little bit with some of these educational interventions. And when I thought about teachers and thinking outside the box, we canvassed on our social media for people's stories about funny stories about their teachers when they were in school. So if you don't mind, I'll kick off and then we can kind of share a couple before we clear up the episode.
Yeah, please.
One listener wrote in to say that a teacher of theirs used to throw board rubbers at children. Okay, I think in our generation that was more normal than maybe it is now. At least Ollie can tell us that. But one time they accidentally picked up scissors and threw them at a child. Apparently no one was injured, but Jesus, yeah, there you go. So that's one.
This is from first-hand experience. I've had a long day teaching, and a kid had accidentally called me dad.
Oh, embarrassing.
No, I think it was probably a mix of tiredness and a bit of annoyance. I immediately, without thinking, bloody hell, I hope
not. I've got one last one. I've actually got two last ones. Is it okay if sorry to dominate this bit, but I've found some good ones on the internet as well.
Go for it.
On Reddit, one of them, like there was a thread about memorable teachers, and one of them said that one of their teachers had a chair in the classroom that was for Jesus, and no one else was allowed to touch it. But they didn't go to a religious school.
He was waiting. She was waiting.
And last but not least, there was a thing about weird private school traditions. Blundell's is apparently a famous private school. I've never heard of it, but and apparently the head student is allowed to keep a pig on school grounds. Like they have a pet pig that they can bring in. David Cameron, exactly. Yeah, so there you go. Shall we go on to the... You know what? This is actually... I'm going to get Josh to put his recorder to use here in the edit and to play the last post on the Bugle. Because, believe it or not, this is the last of the Egyptian laxatives that we know of.
This is why you come here, folks.
Josh, do you care to sing us in?
I feel like it's going to be a bit somber now, but okay. Egyptian laxative of the week.
This week, to finish off, in truly beautiful style, it's grapes. And you're not eating them.
Oh no.
Oh God, where are they going?
You don't want to know. My dad once had an endoscopy, which is the one that goes down your throat, not up your bum. And the doctor said to him, "Oh, don't worry, the camera's only as thick as a grape." And he said, "Yes, but I don't often sew 30 grapes together and swallow them."
I remember you saying that, Joe, and I remember being with you. I think Josh might have been there at uni, and like I was saying, oh yeah, I could swallow a grape whole.
How did that go?
I tried for about half an hour to swallow this whole grape.
It's really hard.
Times it's so difficult. Yeah, it is tough. Yeah, mad respect for you there, Ben. Yes, it's swallowed 30 of them.
Yeah, I know. Should we do our book review?
Please.
Right, this week we are reviewing Living Creatively with Chronic Illness by Eugene Wheeler and Joyce Dace Lombard. It's a book that talks about creative ways to live with your pain. It looks a little bit at patient perspectives, and it looks a little bit of the journey that patients go on with their pain. Gave it a solid 5 out of 10. It's okay. It's quite short. It really oversimplifies the journey that pain patients go on. But, you know, if you want to have a think about sort of creative ways you can manage your pain, stepping away from that kind of medication-based management of your pain, then perhaps worth a read.
So a good intro is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, good intro to non-medical management.
All right. So I think that brings us to an end of this episode. Any last words from anyone?
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for coming on, Ollie. And if you want to see more from us, you know where you can find it. You can find it on the Patreon. If you want to get in contact with us to ask about anything and to ask Ollie any questions as well, our wonderful guest on the podcast today, you can get in contact with us at paininthepodcass@gmail.com.
Let us know if you want to have Ollie back on the podcast.
Or whether you never want him again.
I feel like I want to see Ollie and Josh go head to head in a battle of teacher versus doctors.
Well, eating, I think I've got a good chance.
I mean, drinking teachers are going to trump you, no way. Like,
No, you don't know doctors then.
Complaining about their workloads.
We can find some challenge to put together for them on Patreon, so keep your eyes peeled to see if something turns up on there. And in that case, join us for the breakdown next week on our Patreon, and if we don't see you there, we will see you in a fortnight.
Goodbye from
Ciao.
me.
I already said ciao.
goodbye from me then.
Arrivederci.
Auf Wiedersehen.